Well, it's been a while since we've been on Diesel's coaster reviews. Honestly, a lot has happened since our Manta review. Making a lot of map concepts, making more map reviews, chilling out, stuff like that. However, one of the more significant things was riding roller coasters in 2024. Now, with my roller coaster riding, I was improving with how I was riding roller coasters compared to 2023 and even 2022. Making smaller milestones in 2023 for riding, like with the longest being a coaster at the time being Mineshaft roller coaster, Tidal Twister being my first inversion, first spinning mouse with Crazy Mouse at my local fair, first wooden coaster, and 20th roller coaster milestone at Belmont Dipper, and riding a Los Angeles icon with West Coaster. However, from the start of 2024, I've made significant progress with my tolerance and credit count. Specifically, I went to Six Flags Magic Mountain for my second time, one of the most iconic parks in the world, due to its ambitious lineup across the years, its location in Southern California, and its unique lineup of 20 different roller coasters names, making it the park with the most roller coasters in the world, at least for 2024 in a park. I was fortunate enough to get 2 visits to Valencia, California, in its Grand Park. One of them was in August of 2022, which I've only ridden one roller coaster during that time. And my second visit on January 6, 2024, got 9 new roller coasters, which is one roller coaster less than my entire 2023 amount for roller coasters from multiple parks for 2023. And typically, when I do a review of roller coasters, I typically make an individual review of each roller coaster in a single video. Since writing almost a half of the coaster collection was too much to make individual scripts, along the fact that this is for more so the overall experience to show, I've decided to make my first combo review for roller coasters, quite similar to my Francisco review for Diesel map reviews. And since I have not ridden the other half of the coaster collection yet, I'll make a review for it for my third visit in the future, along with the fact that I'll also do a video on that for part 2. With that said, I'll start the analysis portion of the video. With the park being a prime location, you need an easy way to access it efficiently, hence the freeway exit. With the park being a couple turns off of the I-5 interstate, plus the grand appearance of driving up towards the park from the freeway, it's very easy to find this park, as even without a GPS, I can argue that you can still get to this park quite easily. Not many parks in Southern California are accessible from the freeway like this, with the most comparable example being SeaWorld San Diego, Interstate 5 exit. Unlike SeaWorld San Diego, you can spot it in both directions for a good minute or two for Six Flags Magic Mountain. All of the driving information you need is that the park is at exit 170, and that the turn into the park is where you're nearby X2. Now when you're at the park, tickets are typically cost around $40 to $60. And parking costs are around $35, without the different tiers of a season pass offered by Six Flags. To be honest, this is one of the less expensive parks in Southern California, being similar to Knott's Berry Farm and Adventure City as a pricing, and definitely less expensive than Disney, Universal, and even Legoland and SeaWorld. Now before going inside the park, you will have to prepare to a long walk distances, since not only you do have the normal park pass, but you all have a long walk from the parking lot to the park entrance, which takes a good 15 to 20 minutes within the closest area to the park. This is because the parking lot is near the other side of Twisted Colossus. Now to be fair, the other California parks like SeaWorld San Diego and Knott's does have long walks like this as well. But this is probably the most blatant example, since you have the aforementioned ways to walk a good perimeter of the park. Now let's say you've made it into the front already with that white archway presented, and then past the metal detectors. Well, now you have 2 entrances to the 2 different parks areas, in the dry park on the left and the Hurricane Harbor on the right. The latter park I have not been to yet due to being closed, but honestly I kind of feel like the slides look quite standard. Once you entered through the standard gate, you can see the standard front gate areas like customer services and flashback. If you want to do a lot of stuff here on a busy day, I do recommend getting a flash pass if you have only one day to visit and you're interested in doing most of the rides at the park. I used one and gotten 9 new roller coaster credits plus 4 re-rides. Anyways, after passing through the shop, you see New Revolution's loop, being the first modern vertical loop created, and it's California's third ever inversion after the former corkscrew at Knott's Berry Farm. At that point, you can choose which direction you want to travel to first. Going right will actually lead you to a more flat section of the park with Throttle Plaza, and the Looney Tunes section being closest. Left leads you towards the mountain section of Magic Mountain. The closest roller coasters are New Revolution, Viper, and X2. My journey starts by heading up the hill on the left side, passing through the aforementioned coasters, and then reaching the top. I passed Tatsu, the B&M flying coaster, and headed down to the newest and best presented section, the Underground, being themed to a more stylistic shop area, like a lot of areas in Southern California, and having a premier ride attraction being West Coast Racers, the second quasi-Mobius coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and the second premier multi-launch at the park. Started with this roller coaster first with my rides, since this was my next roller coaster I've intended to grow as an enthusiast. See, prior to riding, I was familiar with Manta at SeaWorld San Diego as a multi-launch with varied elements and forces. Then there was Tidal Twister with sustained hang time as the focal point of the ride, and finally there was Belmont Dipper in terms of height, being quite comparable to West Coast Racer's height, by just being 4 feet shorter with West Coast Racer. That made this roller coaster more likely to try out. The theming itself felt the most consistent out of the rest of the rides at the park, although quite light, since it was a Six Flags park though, and people usually don't come to these parks for the atmosphere. With the coaster boarding itself, the dispatches were decently efficient for the day I was there. You have an easy restraint system with just a lap bar and premier comfort collars. With my experience, the comfort collars didn't affect my ride experience, and it was more so a visual in terms of boarding the train. It did have enough room for my body to be comfortable. The lap bars also gave room for me due to the orientation of how you pull it down, but it was still safe for people who are picky about their restraint design. However, something that I could argue is less comfortable than the comfort collars is the shin guards, feeling pretty cramped, but at least not uncomfortable for me. But then again, I don't really have like wide legs, so I'd assume this could be more of a problem for somebody who has like wider legs. Once the train has unloaded and loaded passengers, you proceed towards the LSM fin, with the other train left of you. This presents your one of 2 trains that you'll have to race again. If you're interested with a gimmick that gives you additional that doesn't include forces, then the racing is quite a decent kind. You're not always seeing the train directly for all of the time. It's usually nice to you in some form. However, I will say that I prefer analyzing the forces, since while the racing aspect is cool, I kind of feel like the science and art of the roller coaster layout to be more so important and personal for me. Anyways, with your first launch, while weak in the initial acceleration, you have some decent longitudinal G-forces with the acceleration later in the launch. Next, you have one of 2 high 5 elements, as even with a different direction, it'll still give some normal airtime within the normal physics of gravity. However, I did not expect this element to give ejector airtime while aligning with the lap bar while getting ejector, mostly being sideways. Still, this is probably my favorite non-drop or RMC airtime hill, as we're going to get to later. Directly before and after, you have these lateral segments, with laterals with the former and the latter giving decent laterals. After this element, you twist up towards the lone 0G stall of the ride, mimicking Twisted Colossus's Top Gun stall towards the other end of the park, which we'll get to soon. With the 0G stall, I did enjoy the hang time that it provided, comparing it to my previous hang time experience. While Tidal Twister had this super sustained hang time experience, probably one of, if not the most in the world. It did kind of get hold back a point or two with how the restraints were positioned, lowering from the headrest down rather than coming from the front by lowering. West Coast racers thankfully had the restraints come forwards, so it gave more space between my lap and lap bar. So you've gotten at least some seconds of a epicing time. You then have a small pop of floater airtime on the next hill, leading you down to your second launch. Now the next launch does have the same initial kick while rolling it into it, and then a weak acceleration throughout the ride, kind of like an inverse of what happened with the first and then later the third launches. After that, you go through a floaty corkscrew, which reaches its tallest point with that inversion, but still a decent element. Then you have some weak positives into pullout, with the following turn or switchback into the half helix element, presenting some decent positives with the entire turn. After that, weak but sustained laterals and floater are present in the next hill. After that, the strong instance of force came in the final portion of the helix for the white side, getting strong positives throughout the helix. After that, a little pop of floater happens on the next hill, and then a quick expend. Nothing to say about this other than the second turn leading you into the mid-course brake run has some decent laterals. This ends your first half of the ride, while you're waiting in a semi-decorated pit stop area until the next train is ready to be dispatched. It's quite stylized on the left side, similarly with the queue previous, due to the screens and the materials used for the created cars. Once your other trains safely secured, then you proceed to roll out towards the LSM fin like previously, in which this time you'll be on the left side or yellow side of the track instead of the white side. Like before, you repeat the same steps for launch 1, being the unpredicted launch with weak initial acceleration, with some decent acceleration being launched during the launch. Next, you have a similar high five element to the previous, giving some weak laterals and a good ejector airtime. Except instead of a good lateral twist, you have weak laterals twisting out of the element. Afterwards, a floater pop is delivered on the section where it mimics the Top Gun stall element, which leads to a rising 90-degree turn that leads towards a twisting drop into the final LSM. The drop doesn't give airtime in the back, probably at best weak laterals. The fourth launch and corkscrew are identical to the second launch and the first corkscrew in terms of force, with a nice kick in acceleration and a floaty inversion. However, this time you have a floater hop between the launch and the second corkscrew, which is nice that it differentiates from the previous variant for the element. Then you have the two parts of the helix. But this time, the forces are in reverse order, having stronger positives on the first turn, then the twisting floater hill with laterals and floater airtime simultaneously, and decent positives on the final turn. After this helix, you have a speed hill, giving good pop of floater airtime, and then you rise into your final inversion, being a corkscrew. This being less floaty and rather focused on the weak laterals. Probably my least favorite inversion in the ride, but still nothing bad about it. Then you have a turn leading into the brakes, ending your coaster experience. Now for my first credit of the year and 22nd roller coaster I have ridden so far. The consistency of the ride elements and forces were one of the best I've experienced so far. Being fair about my credit order from last year, my first one was Mineshaft Coaster. While being excellent in laterals, it did have a lot of dead spots. It didn't really have too much variety in terms of forces. West Coast Racers does have more consistency with its prime ride time, plus a lot of varied forces, including longitudinal forces, hang time, negative, positives, brief laterals, and floaty sensations throughout the 4,000 feet of track. During the time, it was dethroned Manta at SeaWorld San Diego as my favorite roller coaster. But that wouldn't be the only time when a roller coaster was dethroned from number 1. For now, there's a Woody that's escaping an apocalyptic outbreak that we did afterwards. Introducing West Coast Racer's neighbor, Apocalypse the Ride is a Great Coasters International wooden roller coaster located in the underground, which apparently themed to an apocalyptic outbreak. Opening back in 2009, the plot of land originally held Cyclone, one of the few Din coasters that were ever sold, with Cyclone being a Coney Island / Luna Park Cyclone layout. From what I've heard, Cyclone was a rougher and inferior version of the original layout, and is considered on the weaker end of defunct coasters for Magic Mountain. Thus, it closed in 2006, and Apocalypse replaced the area. With Apocalypse, it would be a more modern Woody, originally themed to Terminator Salvation, with the IP being dropped in 2010. Currently, it goes with the apocalyptic theme. From what I've seen, the theming is lightly done, but there are a few props within the queue, such as this research room here. However, it does seem that it's lightly themed, and unfortunately my group didn't get a chance to view this, as we had those aforementioned skip the line passes. We also didn't get to really see how fast the line went between dispatches, as we didn't really get a good feel of how fast the lines moved. Plus, we didn't really need to memorize the established queue time on the screens. Fortunately, dispatches on Saturday were quite decent, as it's not much it was required to check, with just a seatbelt and your own personal lap bar. Speaking of trains, the trains are thankfully well padded, with the entire car being comfortable enough during the ride, with how the wheels are set a bit further behind the seat compared to other wooden roller coaster trains. Especially since some people may have issues with how the track is if they're quite sensitive to vibration. And then the lap bars are at least comfortable for myself, given how light the lap bars are. And that positive forces are at the strongest pretty light. Although I did ride in the back, so it could have varied across the entire train, which I'll talk about train physics in my Desert Storm review. Anyway, starting off with the chain lift gives an underrated view of the nice rock terrain outside of the park. After that, you have a turnaround leading you to your first drop, being kind of forceless, if I'm going to be honest. That then leads to the rest of the course, having one of my favorite highlights of the coaster being a consistent bumpiness that isn't really uncomfortable for myself, as it's mild enough to give a little texture as for an illusion of intensity and pacing. A very cool aspect of the coaster that does enhance the experience for me. Unfortunately, the coaster does lack in forces, at least in the back row, as for me, only 3 elements do have force, with one of those elements being the following speed hill, giving some ejected airtime throughout the apex of the hill. You then have a high banked turnaround and a small drop turning left. You then have a head towards your second cresting apex of your banked hill that gives the same amount of ejected time before. Then you go in this scream prevention tunnel that gives some weak laterals. After the first tunnel, you exit out of this tiny drop down, and then this S-bend, which afterwards leads you up its upward slope, where you have your station flyby. After that, you have a slope down into your second turn that turns gradually brings you back up, which switches what orientation you're turning. After that, you have a drop down into a turn to the right, which leads you to your final bunny hop on the right. Turning you left this time, which sadly gives no airtime. Then you have this awkward helix into the brake run, ending your somewhat long experience. Now, comparing this to Belmont Dipper, my first wooden roller coaster, is interesting. As while Belmont Dipper had more quantitative forces, they were weaker forces in the front. It felt pretty slow a lot of the time in terms of pacing and momentum. Apocalypse, on the other hand, had an excellent sense of speed with some good airtime pops. But that's about it. Fortunately, Apocalypse didn't at least feel longer due to speed sensation and some good aggressive moments here or there. So Apocalypse is better than Belmont Dipper, with Apocalypse ranking 7th out of 9th of the roller coasters I've ridden all day. Honestly, the area of the underground is probably the most consistently themed out of the park, given how much land is cohesive into each attraction, plus the outdoor section working well for detail. Unfortunately, not too much in terms of quantity for attractions happens here, as there's only 2 roller coasters plus an upcharged go-kart attraction being present here. Despite this, I did like the overall area and be here for the first time. At least the area was quite manageable. After that, our group did head back up the hill and back to the front of the park, where we rode New Revolution in order to ride the 48-year-old roller coaster.
There it goes.
One of the main icons for the park. This would be the first successful vertical loop attempted, as well as the first addition that would start the park's legacy. Talking about inversions prior to this, a few experiments were attempted to create an inversion, specifically in the 1910s. There were some exceptions like Wiener Prater's Loopingbahn in 1948 and centrifugal railway in 1842. These experiments would be reported as either too intense for the rider, have stress on the track, or have low capacity, given these were 4-seater side friction cars using centrifugal forces to operate. The most famous example of this would be the flip-flap rally, reported to pull 12 Gs, which is twice more than what the ASTM requirement will allow as max at 6 Gs. The results from riders experiencing injuries due to forces and whiplash being very extreme. Since Loopingbahn, there wouldn't be another inversion attempted until 1975, as seen with the new concept of steel tubular tracks created by aerodynamics, with the examples of the Matterhorn, bobsleigh, Calico Mine Ride, and Mine Train roller coaster models. This would be a little the steel track would be used for a little corkscrew model, with 4 installations in 1975, as well as Extreme Roller at Worlds of Fun in 1976, less than a month before New Revolution. While aero corkscrews did exist prior to New Revolution, they were attempted in an easier way to create an inversion, with the inversion corkscrew using banking as the way to invert, rather than using vertical movement of the car, which resulted in less forces to calculate, and therefore a more reliable way to keep your current velocity and speed of the coaster, hence a less impressive inversion than the vertical loop. This would change in 1976, as both Magic Mountain and Cedar Point will both build a roller coaster with a vertical loop for the 1976 season. However, unlike the corkscrew model, as well as the corkscrew at Cedar Point, Magic Mountain would go with German manufacturer Schwarzkopf to create the first vertical loop in general, and Schwarzkopf's first inversion. The ride would open on May 8th, 1976, an exact week before Corkscrew at Cedar Point would open their coaster. The coaster would be somewhat a terrain coaster, having portions hugging the terrain and usually being hidden away apart from one helix, the track passing through the vertical loop, and of course the famous vertical loop itself. In terms of the plaza itself, a great way to present the park's terrain aspect, given how hidden the layout is, and how the coaster interacts with the hill, although no theming is attempted around the coaster's area. With the coaster area itself, it's quite easy to access with all you have to do is walk left from the park entrance and walk on the main pathway until you encounter a large New Revolution sign on your right. There you enter the queue, and the queue has no switchbacks, as well as a short walking distance. After that, you enter the station, having 10 rows that seat 2 people. Now, due to how low the intensity of the roller coaster is, New Revolution typically will have less people to go on, even though it's the first roller coaster you approach when walking into the park. In my visit during this time, the New Revolution only ran 1 train. Now, while I do wish it ran 2 trains for faster throughput, 1 train didn't really impact the ride too badly, since the wait times weren't crazy. When you get on the coaster train, you have both a seatbelt and a singular metal bar coming down. Thankfully, this restraint design is quite comfortable, given no additional forces will allow the rider to touch the bar. And additionally, this will not force your lap bar down. In fact, it's quite forgiving on the lap. Once the ride dispatches, you send the lift hill into the woods, which during that climb over the pathway up top of the hill. Now, I like to state that I only rode in the front 2 rows, so it's likely that the forces could vary compared to my analysis. Although I kind of doubt that, given how gradual the ride is. Although things could change. Anyways, you start off with a 180-degree turn, followed by a shallow downward slope, giving no forces while accelerating with the front seat. Then you have some mild positive forces within the pullout, being quite brief, as you really don't have too much ground with circumference to gain more sustained positives. Then you have an airtime hill that is too slow to give any forces in the front. After that, the description for the previous 3 elements can then be followed for the following drop, pull out, and airtime hill. After that, you have a 3rd downward slope, being forceless in the front, which then morphs into a 270-degree helix, having a bit more sustained positives, but still being quite weak in terms of strength. After that comes the standout of the ride, the thing that we've all been waiting for, the thing that many people ride this ride for, a slope that leads you towards the vertical loop. Now with the falling slope and elements prior, this would build up anticipation for the inversion. And it does make sense for the time, given that this would be the first vertical loop that would be well known by the general public, and given something to look forward to. Thus, you have a forceless slope and then the vertical loop, giving the best positives for the bottom of each section of the loop, being quite decent in terms of strength. So now that this would be my first vertical orientation for inversions, I expected prior to the vertical loop would feel different to a more lateral orientation for inversion, like West Coast Racers Untitled Chapter gave. But it wasn't really too different, other than the sequencing of gravity being different compared to the lateral orientation, which does make sense based on physics on gravity and how kinetic energy is applied during the sensation. After that, you have a forceless turnaround, along with a slight drop down with no forces, and a 200-degree turn into a tunnel that has no forces whatsoever. After that, you go through into between the loop's diameter, having a cool visual of seeing the other side of the loop. You then turn right into the shallow hill. Both don't really have forces. Finally, you have a final helix, having a lateral kink at the start, leading towards the final brake run. Now, talking about the ride's purpose, it's a good way to introduce many people to their first inversion, with the fact that while a vertical loop is more intimidating in height compared to an inline twist, in that inverting coasters don't really need over-the-shoulder restraints to be considered safe. In terms of comparing this to my own first inversion coaster, Tidal Twister was more gimmicky and less varied compared to New Revolution. While the forces on Tidal Twister was more sustained and intense, with the hang time, New Revolution had a longer layout with some good build-up towards the anticipation of the loop, plus has a variety of track configurations, such as the large hills in the beginning, the vertical loop in the middle, and the low-to-the-ground turns of the end. In terms of the coaster so far, this ranks towards the bottom of the 3 we've talked about so far, but not disregarding what we've talked about so far.
Hello there. I'm actually Diesel's map reviews, coaster reviews. Yes. Welcome to our McDonald's location. What do you want?
I want a
You gotta
burger.
elaborate.
Not just any burger.
I know.
Want
Do you want
the burger on the
this,
menu.
I don't know. The vegetables.
one that has
the condiments,
items.
Just give me something.
You know,
Sir,
the
you're
one
being
that
very disrespectful. How dare you?
the one that has the grease and other stuff.
With this being an amusement park, you would know that one of the most important things about someone's experience is the food. I mean, many others, people would buy food at the park for one reason or another. So, when talking about food, I would say that my group did not eat at the park at all. Instead, we left the park with a re-entry stamp. Instead, went to the Wendy's nearby the park and I-5 highway, which from what I've heard has better food than most of the locations at the park for almost half the cost. Just telling you, the food at Magic Mountain looks to be more so a standard like amusement park food. Almost like for pizza, like the classics that many kids would probably and parents can probably like. There are some signatures like Twisted Witches sandwiches, the Cheeto snack bar, the funnel cakes, a Starbucks, or certain beer locations. Well, at best, I've heard the food there was decent. And while that's cool, I would say that's not verifying paying close to $20 on food when you can just get a full meal at a nearby Wendy's or In-N-Out locations, which is nearby the I-5 highway, especially when they allow free re-entry when getting a designated stamp. But anyways, yeah, the food that we had was pretty good, and yeah. After that, we have witnessed Twisted Colossus testing. Since it was down for the majority of the day, we've decided to get a ride on that. And since it was one of the icons of the park, I've decided, you know what? Let's make it my first RMC. That means we might even get to we can go on Twisted Colossus. Twisted Colossus is the quasi-Mobius racing roller coaster located on the right side of the park, being only 10 feet short from 5,000 feet of track, a height of 121 feet, and 2 inversions thrown in there. A little known history: this used to be one of the original icons of the park for its lifespan. It was considered to be the tallest wooden coaster at the time, and was featured in some well-known media, like one of the Lampoon Vacation movies. After many decades of Colossus existing, we had a manufacturer called Rocky Mountain Construction that created a few steel hybrid coasters, converting wooden coaster structures into more thrilling layouts at more theoretical, cheaper costs, with less work than has to do with building a new layout, compared to other roller coasters where you could just build from the ground up. This will be the 4th conversion in general, as well as the 6th for Six Flags, and the 6th RMC to be built, by opening in May of 2015. In addition to Twisted Colossus being a remodified version of Colossus, it would also become the first quasi-Mobius coaster to open in over 117 years. So instead of being 2 different tracks or having 2 different stations, you have both sides that you can do for the racing aspect for the price of one. Now the ride is located towards the back right side of the park, nearby Goliath and the entrance of Lex Luthor Drop of Doom, and DC Universe. The easiest way to approach this is by the entrance of the park is to walk right of New Revolution before you hit DC Universe, which by that point you walk onto the pathway on your right, and then you approach Twisted Colossus on your right. Then on you have many switchbacks for the queue until you approach the train of the ride, having 6 cars and 12 rows altogether. Talking about dispatches on my day, there were 2 trains running on the day we went on, and dispatches were not well. It would take an entire cycle of the previous train in order to dispatch the next train, which theoretically is around 4 minutes. Not the best when you're having dispatches, but it's not horrendous. I will say that if you're running with 2 or less trains, then you'll not duel on this roller coaster. While is the selling point for a lot of people, I personally would look at the forces and sequencing of the ride, since that's what I enjoy most out of roller coasters overall, especially this one. When talking about boarding, it goes as followed. When the gates open, you can store bigger loose articles like baggages, backpacks, and purses in the storage bin on the other side of the station towards the exit. Smaller items like phones, keys, wallets, or your park pass can go in the zippered pouches. When seated, you have your own seatbelt and frontal lap bar, similar to West Coast Racers, minus the comfort collars. you have slightly bigger shin guards and a bulkier lap padding. Now, from one of the rides, it did slightly pinch my pants, but then again, it didn't bother my rides. It could have been just the position of how I was sitting towards the lap bar. Just to note, the rides between the front and back are quite similar, although the back is probably the best row, given you have one moment that's vastly superior in the back. But for now, I'll go element by element with the full analysis of each one. Starting off, you turn left out of the station and head into some booster tires. In air quote. These do accelerate the train from a technicality standpoint, but they're not really there for forces, and rather just to speed up the train through the next section. Next, you have a pre-lift section. Hills on the ride may give weak floater at best for the pre-lift, but they're just a build-up. Then you head into the lift hill, given a nice view of the eastern part of the park, Santa Clarita, and Valencia. After that, it follows up the first drop. In terms of the forces, the thing had alright ejector in terms of force, with a dangling sensation in the front car before the full impact of gravity comes in. In terms of the back, it was noticeably more forceful, having a stronger ejector moment in general. Additionally, this drop had a slight turn while dropping, with you having airtime throughout the entire drop while rotating with the track. Now, this drop might be better than most of the other drops I have done, including Wonder Woman that's going to be coming up soon, given it gives spice towards a great drop. This is probably my favorite moment of the coaster due to the variety it gives in a singular moment in terms of uniqueness. After that, the entire train experiences a good second of ejector on the speed hill, both in terms of duration and strength. Then comes the second tallest portion of the ride, with the entrance element giving a solid moment of positives, and the exit having a sustained ejector while cresting the hill element. It's probably stronger towards the front, but the back does get a similar sensation, although a bit weaker. Afterwards, you have the first wave turn of the high 5 element, giving a good pop of ejector sideways, similarly to how West Coast Racers does theirs. Then you have the second drop of the ride, having alright ejector throughout the front and good ejector in the back. This follows with a speed hill, giving an identical sensation of the previous speed hill. After this, you have a blue camelback portion of the Top Gun install, essentially being an element mimicking the Top Gun plane maneuver in the Top Gun movies. In terms of the blue camelback, this gives slightly weaker airtime compared to the first 3 airtime moments, but a bit more sustained in terms of duration, being the most sustained airtime moment of the ride, with the airtime being still good in ejector. After that, you have a 0G roll, giving a floaty sensation throughout the roll. Now, I would like to note that while many do like the fact that the inversion feels floaty, I personally don't really care about the floaty element in general concept, since stronger forces and power or creativity are typically more memorable for myself. I typically associate floaty elements with keeping the order of the pacing of the coaster consistent, the vibe of the coaster consistent, or a nice transition between one section or another. And while coasters like West Coast Racers and Scream does have a consistent flow there, I feel like changing from a sustained ejector airtime moment to 0G-ness and then going to a couple quick pops of ejector wasn't really the best decision in my opinion. But I will say that the element is alright, just weak compared to the rest of the coaster. After that, you have 2 ejector pops with double up for the entire train, being sustained for the entirety of the cresting the hill. After that, you have a pop of floater on the outer banked hill for the entire train, ending the blue side of Twisted Colossus. Now, while looking at the blue side alone, I would call this coaster pretty good. Definitely has a variety of how strong the negative G's would be, along with the variety, but I would probably prefer West Coast Racers. It feels only just the blue side, due to being quite short and feeling incomplete. However, thanks to the park going with the quasi-Mobius layout, I will say that the ride feels more complete, especially since the most elements don't feel identical. With the green side The drop, speed hill, and the first ascent up are all identical in every way, with the twist and drop to the sustained airtime movements of the speed hill and adjacent ascent. However, the second part of the high five, you get all right laterals entering and exiting the element combined with the ejector airtime as before. After that, you have the famous twisted double down. This gave quick pops of ejector in all rows, being one of the weaker elements of the ride. Since it's not really sustained, still. Then after this, leads you to the second part of the Top Gun stall, being this floaty 0G stall. Next is a pop of ejector on this hill, underneath the 0G roll, and after that has a double up, identical to the previous one. And after that, it leads you to your final moment, ending with floater in the back, and in your experience of the park's ejector machine. Now, despite my rides not dueling, I do think the coaster feels very consistent and varied with how it presents a lot of the ejector moments. The tallest drop and high A5 elements are probably my favorite parts of the ride, with how strong in strength their forces are, and how little modifications in the track can be really impacted a ride's force, at least for like roller coasters proportions and radiuses. That already gives 3 out of the 4 criteria of a ride to be favoritized, being consistency, variety, and strength. The fourth one in duration is fine, given you have a 30-second interval for each color side. With that said, I will say that this is my overall number 1 roller coaster, and easily the best roller coaster I've ridden that day. Twisted Colossus, we did ride Wonder Woman Flight of Courage. I will say that this will not be a full review due to the fact that I don't remember anything outside of the first drop and information outside of the ride experience. This isn't because the ride was forgettable, it was just I wasn't thinking about the elements, since Twisted Colossus did put a high expectations on myself, and the fact was that no other coaster felt as strong as forces did previous to that ride, which actually kind of like muffled like the Wonder Woman Flight of Courage experience. Anyways, with that said, some information about the ride goes as followed. Wonder Woman Flight of Courage was the 20th coaster still operating at the park, instead of being the 20th coaster added in Magic Mountain's history. Before this coaster was added, Green Lantern First Flight occupied the station building for this ride. One of the most despised coasters in the world due to the train's modification that was created for the rotations that intend to be a more reliable way to approach the station upright. Since the final element had a more intense flipping mechanism with how compact the radius is for the apex. As a lot of us know about Green Lantern, the G-forces of the cars itself were not consistent with the motions of the seats and packed, having elements taken incorrectly compared to the original concept. The biggest examples are when the trains were mysteriously inverted for a few valleys, with Ryder for some reason having strong positives while in the inverted position, which technically violates ASTM guidelines for the train and Ryder's configuration. Green Lantern First Flight would operate from 2011 to 2017, and then the coaster standing but not operating in 2018 to 2019. After that, it was relocated to La Ronde and it was put in storage for 2019 to 2022, anticipating to be built there until they decided to drop the project overall and not continue it. If that situation was playing out, Six Flags Great Adventure would build their coaster for 2021, being Jersey Devil Coaster, claiming to be the tallest, fastest, and longest single rail still in operation. Many speculated that since Great Adventure was getting a Raptor like that, it would make sense for Six Flags to make a near identical clone for Six Flags Magic Mountain, along with the space being provided by Tidal Wave and Green Lantern being gone. I mean, the ride had the marketability, unique structure, and the train setup. Looks like it'll give an interesting, thrilling ride towards the smaller perspective. As you approach the station, you have these switchbacks with some minimal decoration. These include the paintings, weapons, and pillars on the wall, making up the decoration. After that, you approach the free lockers before approaching the station. Now, these are are one of 2 coasters at the park, requiring lockers due to the ride system being a bit more complicated compared to the standard station with trains stopped to load riders at the air gates, and loading and unloading at the same station. In terms of the coaster, this uses a continuous loading platform to load and unload trains. The trains are 12 cars long, having only 1 person per car. The situation for loading and unloading is also prevalent with RogoQuests, given they usually don't allow you to request your seat for standard riders. Although there is a loophole in this operation, if you're part of the group and you have the flash passes, an operator will allow you to choose either the front or back in the name of easiest efficiency. With the coaster, I do recommend the back row since the most intense moment is by far the first drop, getting sustained straw ejector throughout the moment of the falling the first curve. Even with the RMC Raptor trains, basically having an overhead lap bar with best restraints. Now with the train, I would say that the shoulder straps are kind of restrictive in terms of upper body movement, but from my experience it wasn't uncomfortable, excluding the weird feeling of having the straps on your shoulders when first lowering the lap bar. Other than that, your train feels quite freeing, having your legs spread apart in a straddle position, plus the fact that the lap bar is the main restraint holding you in, so thankfully the train is quite comfortable. Now unfortunately, that's where my analysis ends for this roller coaster, due to the fact that my memory is quite vague and insufficient of the attraction. This was due to the fact that I wasn't really focusing on the analysis on the ride. In fact, I rode Twisted Colossus earlier, as mentioned before. All I remember from that was the first drop being quite strong in ejector, 0 G-stall being floating, and the valley of the drop being a mid-course brake run having quite decent positives. Once I re-ride the roller coaster, then I will make an individual review on the coaster itself, focusing on the ride experience. So instead, I'll just talk about my pre-ride experience and then the rankings of the ride. Believe it or not, due to my tolerances with how structured appearance has improved. Before Magic Mountain in 2023, my tallest roller coaster was 73 feet with Belmont Dipper, and a smaller end of thrilling attractions of California as a whole, closer to a consistent 90 to 150 average range. With the previous coaster from the park, none of them really appeared as quite tall, given the 4 previous ones had structures. 3 of the 4 didn't really have steeper vertical drops, and 3 of the 4 being on the smaller side compared to Wonder Woman. However, since my rides on Twisted Colossus has similar statistics and formats like the steep drop in a 120 to 130 range, there was a slightest intimidation based on the structure, but I could brush it aside due to the statistics and comparisons to other experience did calm me down and was more familiar with. Due to the fact that Wonder Woman did have a variety of forces, remember being consistent and was a long experience. I barely prefer it over West Coast Racers, but it's inferior to Twisted Colossus, making it the second best roller coaster I've ridden for the park, at least so far. After our rides on Wonder Woman, we head towards our next door neighbor, the B&M invert theme to our most favorites, Batman. Small, compact, whippy, forceful, and most importantly, clone Throttle machine from our friends at Bollinger and Maviard was a first impression for them to manufacture. The backstory for this coaster starts back in 1981, where our once respective innovators of thrill contraptions started creating suspended coasters, being the first to be hanging from the track. This new contraption was first created at Kings Island, known as the original iteration of the Bat. With the installation, people had a blast on this unpredicted intensity of a whipping vehicles, bringing justice towards the hearts of Ohio. After Arrow's craft wouldn't stop there, as they created more and more until they built 10 for themselves. Given that that's the number that would flow off the tongue better than saying the ugly number 13 after the foul Dutch business that betrayed them a few times before being called Vekoma, created a swinging turns creation themselves. But they're not really important for the story. Anyways, Arrows was bragging about their suspended coasters, saying that they're unique for parks to have. However, a shady figure was haunting the background. one approaching selective rides with an intent of vengeance and a look of glee. The Grim Diminisher. The main thing that all park staff, executives, maintenance workers, advertisers, and most importantly the floozies that spend most, all have fear and intimidation against this guy. Like all rides that have been he's touched before, he would pick on all 10 suspended coasters in one way or another. Some of them he undid some of the bolts on the metal structure. Sometimes he poured curious fluids on the track itself. Sometimes it was cracking of the cement. Sometimes it was the wheels having some used accessories getting stuck with. Or sometimes was stealing the audience and money from crying executives. But worst of all, he was greased the pendulum, weighed some of the sides down of the cars, and manipulated gravity to pull the cars in particular areas. And none of them for the beneficial reason. 5 attempts of his were successful, some lasting longer than others. However, there was a hero that helped the other 5, that being the well-tempered maintenance, having a passion for saving as many rides as they can, except those RCCA contraptions that he was fine with leaving in the dust. He would try to keep helping at all costs, providing encouragement and guidance with the people who had worked at the parks. Seeing this, he saved many lives at his own pace, protecting a lot of rides, and most importantly, keeping a stable comedy status. While WTM did keep 5 of the 10 suspended coasters out of true danger, there was one thing that kept him doing any true stunts, that being inversions. You see, Grim Diminisher would sneak into the Utah headquarters of aerodynamics and tamper the train physics once again during the test run for the cork bender, famous for making her little corkscrews. Cork bender would get upset once Grim Diminisher uses Newton laws against her. After seeing this, she would get pissed and try to get away from him, which wanted to go to a special place called Switzerland to recruit actual heroes. Bulger of Amaviard were experimenting with how they make the most precise creation for compatibility and maintenance. Corkbender asked them to make their stand-up creations just underneath the track, and after them, that Grim Diminisher was killing the innovation that the world has thirsted on. After sitting on the concept in a little bit of red A's, B's, and O's spilled out of each of their arms and legs, they agreed to the plan and created a certain weapon landing in Illinois, just an hour from Chicago. They created a system like their stand-up coasters, having 4 across seating, padded over the shoulder straits, a seat groove, limited length of all the seats, high capacity in their signature, boxy and reliable track, and most of all, inversions. They were prepared for the worst. They strapped their power tools in that they constructed and deconstructed with the trust between each of them. They saw the Diminisher approach once the ride was built. Everyone showed fear and intimidation after every step. As he got closer, the power tools would be kept tight in their grips, thinking about their safety rather than the structure first, and then until Batman surprisingly popped out of nowhere and beat the living...
Ah, damn. The book is not finished yet. Well, I give up on this gimmick. Back to the old strategy.
Well, that was embarrassing. Anyways, all there is left in the backstory was Six Flags Great America got their first inverted roller coaster. It was a success. It then got cloned everywhere. The third clone going to Six Flags Magic Mountain. This part put B&M on the map, and etc. Are you happy about this? Anyways, Batman to ride at Six Flags Magic Mountain would become the second multi-looper built in the park, after Viper at the Aero Mega Looper was built. Now with Viper, it appears to be more so an imposing focus compared to Batman, focusing on putting 7 inversions on a roller coaster that's 180 feet tall. Quite tall for a multi-looper, whereas Batman would focus on its speed and inverted aspect, as its marketing probably one of the reasons why it didn't feel redundant. unlike some other multi-loopers in the park. Now with the presentation of the coaster, this is definitely one of the more immersive coasters in the park, at least in attempting some theming and decoration with the outdoor portion of having some fountain portions, a gothic gate, and some station looking like the Batcave. Although no story, unfortunately, unlike the other Batman-themed coasters outside of Six Flags. Now, in terms of how the station performance went, it was one of the best roller coasters with capacity and efficiency that I've ridden that day. The park was running 2 trains on the coaster, 8 rows of 4 seats, having a train of capacity of 32, which most coasters in the park don't hold a candle to, even with multiple trains, Wonder Woman being an example of a worse capacity with 2 trains. This train capacity definitely helps given the dispatches were around 90 to 120 seconds, so this is not really the best or worst for dispatch times. The coaster does have standard B&M restraints, where you have a good amount of padding surrounding your head, yet nothing truly claustrophobic in terms of headspace, although it's just to state that the padding isn't really wide either. Thankfully, due to the fact that the coaster is quite precise in terms of track fabrication and precision of track flow and heart lining, you will likely not experience headbanging from the profiling specifically. From my experience, the trains also feel quite freeing, given the restraints contacted primarily with my thighs, along with the fact that the additional seatbelt was located on the restraint itself, versus other coasters in the park having seatbelts connected across your lap. Finally, I like to note that my only ride on Batman was on the back right corner of the train, which probably gives you the most forceful lateral moment from what I've heard. However, I assume that the front probably has the best for the quantity of positive, due to how coaster physics suggest that the ascensions typically have stronger forces in the front, where is a topic that I'll go through in our next week's video. Anyways, you start off with your 105-foot tall lift hill, giving a view similar to Apocalypse with the boundaries of the park, while in front of you and towards your left are the coasters for DC Universe, the underground and some of the hillside coasters that are present more north of the hillside. Once you approach the top, you have a pre-drop and your twisting drop. Now in the back, you unfortunately have no forces until you approach the loop. But this section is thankfully more so short, so it's forgivable. Plus the fact that you do build up speed pretty quick, decently. After the drop, you head into your first vertical loop, which is the highlight of the entire coaster for myself. How you consistently have strong positives throughout most of the entire loop makes it quite memorable for myself, given that there's no other loop I've ridden that has the consistency of having positives throughout the entire element, as of May of 2024. After the first vertical loop, you next have a 0G roll, having decently strong laterals throughout the entire roll, and you on an edge seat. Now with the roll for this element, the B&M coasters probably have 2 ways of experiencing the roll. And more so, the inner seats, you'll probably demonstrate a 0G floatiness, whereas the outer seats will demonstrate laterals. The latter sensation I didn't really find to be something I really enjoyed, given in this particular case, it was more so rotating the seat where the individual rail was located instead of where the intended heartliner or the outside of the rails, which more so had the seats rotating along the track with the laterals. Not a bad sensation, just not really my taste in terms of sensations. Then followed a second vertical loop, being identical in force with the first one. After that, you have a 270-degree helix, a long S-bend, and a curving drop. In the back, this sensation is the dead spot of the ride, not only being devoid of any forces, but also the fact that there's nothing really happening for a long amount of time, being several seconds until the final inversions. Now, while this could be a good break for those that might have been exhausted from the previous 3 elements, I would personally prefer a more complete and consistently intense ride over sporadic moments that are sporadic, yet are great in terms of strength. Especially since you have a second half after these 3 elements. You then approach your first corkscrew, having a short but powerful burst of laterals when at the apex of the inversion. which, while I expected this inversion to have sustained positives or even laterals, I would say that the inversion is quite strong in force, and is the second highlight of the coaster, with the first going to the vertical loops. After that corkscrew, you have a forceless yet swift turn to the right, and then have a second corkscrew and final inversion on the right, having the same forces as the first corkscrew, just in the other direction. Finally, you have a forceless turn up towards the brake run, ending your experience at the markable face of Gotham. Now, with the experience of riding below the track comfortably and being my first B&M, there's some mixed traits. On one hand, there are some very forceful moments of the coaster, having some strongest laterals and positives compared to other credits in the park that I've experienced so far. On the other hand, duration and consistency isn't always there, such as some breaks in between elements, or even entire sections where nothing happens. The latter is the reason why I don't really rank this as high, given my preferences for coasters prefer a more consistent and longer ride duration. Hence why I prefer my other two B&M credits that I have experienced as of May of 2024. Now, despite my criticisms, I will say that the coaster is forceful enough and has somewhat variety in elements to be better than a lot of other coasters I have ridden previously, and even after the ride. So therefore, this places a 4th out of 6 so far, below West Coast Racers while being above Apocalypse. So with one blue B&M follows with a second blue B&M in the same park, featuring the multi-looper floorless coaster Scream, what's known as the black sheep of Magic Mountain, due to its setting being blatant about being a parking lot, along with the Scream being a mirrored clone of Medusa at Six Flags Great Adventure. Speaking of, Medusa would be the first floorless coaster that B&M would construct back in 1999. Having a gimmick of their standard multi-loopers, but with no floor while the track was below you. I honestly feel like that the gimmick of floorless seats was kind of redundant, given nothing ride-wise would really change. At least it would be as successful with 13 ground-up installations from 1999 to 2013, and 3 conversions from stand-up to floorless coasters. In this instance, Magic Mountain would get a clone of the original coaster, Medusa, at Six Flags Great Adventure. As I assumed that the coaster was successful, it had 7 flashing versions. The public was interested with multi-loopers for the time. It was a new coaster, a modern coaster, at Six Flags Magic Mountain. That included floorless trains. In present day 2024, Scream typically has the lower guest going to the coaster, with one of the reasons likely due to how remote the coaster is from the pathway. Now, you remember Twisted Colossus, right? The coaster a bit hidden from the pathways, but still very good. Well, I now want you to do is do the tempting choice of walking past the Twisted Colossus' entrance, and then until you see a coaster of blue and orange right in front of you, and then you may or may not want to ride. It's your decision. The other reason why Six Magic Mountain theoretically has a lower demand could be how less special the coaster might feel towards the average park person, since most coasters here have some special trait off-ride that allows many to have some sort of entrance to the ride, whereas this has only 7 versions going for it, along with a smooth experience, and honestly, Riddler and Viper have a similar concept, except has a few more special traits than Scream, like Viper being 180 feet tall, having a vertical loop being built up far from the ground, whereas Riddler having a longer experience and having stand-up trains. Despite the negative attributes to Scream, you at least have one thing that could excuse everything that I've mentioned, and that would be, is this the ride actually good? Well, we'll get there shortly. First is how the ride operates. Like Batman, it runs 8 cars of 4 people, and a train capacity of 32. However, instead of 2 train operations, Scream runs with 1 train operations, and consistently runs like this. Thankfully though, this isn't really a big of an issue, given that Scream rarely gets a line past the capacity of the train. Dispatches on the coaster remember being similar to Batman with 90 to 120 seconds intervals, so it's not really that bad. Not good in terms of efficiency. Finally, you have the restraints being identical towards Batman, being quite comfortable, although the headspace isn't big enough where you can get headbanging. Thankfully, like Batman, the coaster is precise with heart lining, track fabrication, smoothness, and track flow likely will prevent headbanging. Although be aware, I've heard that the coaster potentially gets a rattle over time once a train doesn't get refurbished very soon, or like a longer time. I fortunately did get a smooth ride on January 6th, 2024, although you may not be as fortunate. In terms of row selection, I would try experimenting with different rows, specifically the back row, given that row can improve the laterals for some moments. You start by having this little pre-lift dip into the 150-foot tall lift hill. After that, you have a pre-drop and a twisting drop. These do not have any forces, sadly. However, this does gain some speed quite quickly for the next few elements. Next, you approach the 128-foot tall loop, having one of the tallest vertical loops in the world. The following valley of the loops have some decently strong and sustained 2-second positives, while having some float during the apex of the loop. After that, the second valley, you then have the dive loop, which while no forces in the upper portion of the dive loop, the following valley does have sustained 2 seconds of decently strong positives. After that, you have a B&M 0G roll, having similar 0G towards Batman with its decently strong laterals. After that comes another sustained 2 seconds of positives, until you approach your Cobra roll. With the unverting the element for the first time, you get an alright moment of laterals where you sit on the right, which is nice to get that variety on a coaster after many moments of positives. After inverting, you repeat what happens in the half corkscrew element and half loop element, just in reversed order. Reinverting will give you the same amount of alright laterals on the right side, along with a decently strong positives sustained for 2 seconds on the valley. After that, the train goes into a mid-course brake run, which didn't really slow down the train all too much. Now from this moment, I kind of wanted to catch up my breath when riding, since I kind of got exhausted during the ride. Now maybe because I ate Wendy's earlier, plus I rode 3 thrill coasters beforehand, could have caused me to be a bit exhausted. However, beforehand, I haven't really experienced a coaster that had much forces quite sustained and being strong, while breaking up the motion with inversions to such a long extent. These moments were back-to-back within seconds, showing a longer impact towards my tolerance compared to other coasters like Batman. However, despite being a bit exhausted, I still enjoyed the moments during the experience. This consistency was something that I had experienced often. However, that dream kind of whimpered as the mid-course, as everything would become pretty tame afterwards. You have a bank to drop downwards with no forces, followed by a helix that had this light on the positives. After that, a disappointing twisted hill that has no forces, not even strong enough to have laterals nor airtime. Then follows a corkscrew with very light laterals within the entrance. After that follows a turnaround that does nothing, and then a corkscrew that has the equal amount of laterals as before. And you have a forceless hill, and then turn into the final brake run. Like Batman to ride, Scream has a very strong side and very weak side of the experience. However, instead of having these moments integrated throughout the coaster, Scream has a consistently forceful start, while almost completely dying in the second half. Scream's good moments are defined by how the rhythm of the first portion is very consistent and forceful. A forceful but slightly sustained valley, followed by an inversion, rinse and repeat, while doing this within 5 seconds of each other. And while the pacing is inconsistent throughout the entire ride, it still does have a good, strong elements. Finally, the duration of the ride is decently long for a coaster, even compared to the main competitor in the 4th ranking of the park so far, Batman Ride. That's why I decided to rank Scream at 4th in between Batman and West Coast Racers. After Scream, we've decided to take a little break from the thrill attractions and head towards what one of my siblings wanted to do, And that's a kids coaster. So we've headed towards Bugs Bunny World, the main kids area. That was relatively near the Goliath entrance, and being the main kids area, it made sense to have 3 kids coasters right nearby, all themed to the classic Warner Bros. IP Looney Tunes. Now, we barely did anything really in this land, as we just rode the Zamperla Gravity Coaster, so I'll just say that the area did have some decoration throughout the land, although it was kind of minimal, as it felt kind of basic of how the decoration didn't really have realistic shaping. Although, then again, this is a Six Flags park, so it's more so an extra rather than Six Flags being lazy or cheap. I'll say that there is some props in there, as well as like some like attempt at like adding some decoration. Although it's not really like to some extent like what other parks have like shown with their kids areas. Anyways, the one kids coaster I've experienced that day was Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers, a Zamperla Gravity Coaster. This would be the final gravity variant built, as Zamperla would improve on the model after the coaster, trying to be more accommodating for larger guests, along with attempting to improve the transitions with the 92-meter junior coaster layout. Whereas the gravity coaster has a single position T-bar, which kind of made the ride cramped for a person that's 5'7" like myself. Then the 92-meter layout would have been individual lap bars. Other statistics of the ride include the coaster being 13 feet tall, making this a good kids coaster to start out as your first coaster. You know, to get gravity as key component in your roller coaster experience. Anyways, your coaster experience starts off with your chain lift with a twisting drop. This is forceless. Then you have a valley, which unironically gives a weird moment of positive G-forces in my spine due to how compact the valley was. This moment weirdly made this ride memorable in some way. And then you have a 360-degree helix around some race car theming on who got first, second, and third, along with the petrol stop, which is neat to have. The rest of the ride after that one rear valley is sadly forceless, but at least it's a good the kids get a second lap around, so it's not too bad. Now, this coaster was quite smooth and decently profiled, and with that, we've ended our experience of this coaster. Now, even though that the coaster did have one weird moment of positives, we sadly have to rank this coaster in last since the others had more going on. Although, we do give the credit for the cutest credit we've read that day. And finally comes the grand closer of the night.
I got your name. You will not laugh. You will not cry. Can you feel it? 1, 2, 3.
Nah, I'm just kidding with X2. Instead, we've ridden Full Throttle as our last ride of the night. Ah yes, this ride. This would be a Premier Ride Skyrocket 3 model, being the third Skyrocket installation, and having a few records that it broke to when it's open, such as the world's tallest vertical loop when it opened in 2013, having a few secret tricks, and having the first coaster to have a track climb over the loop, and having the tallest drop be last. This was all accommodated of a YOLO theme for the ride, along with the stage being like appearance in the front of the ride. In terms of the appearance being before riding is quite minimal, as you just have the aforementioned plaza, a covered queue space, and the hillside that's distal from the station. However, it's not really too big of a deal given that the ride is more so a thrill coaster, as the focal point. Approaching the station, you have 9 rows, seating 2 people at once. Along with this, every 3 rows are located in one car of the train. Like many modern LSM variants of Premier coasters, each train offers a lap bar and a lap seatbelt. Now with the train, they feel similar to West Coast Racers. having a semi-compact train with a lap bar that's pulled in front of you, which personally makes the hang time and negative G's more exposing compared to the lap bars and over-the-shoulder restraints that are adjacent with your headrest, especially since these lap bars aren't overly padded. However, some differences include a lap seatbelt instead of a comfort collar, which while didn't impact my ride specifically, I've heard the comfort collar some didn't really like the experience when West Coast racers or Electric Eel performed laterals or airtime due to contact with the rubber vest. So thankfully, it's more comparatively comfortable between the other new age premieres in Southern California. Additionally, I remembered shin guards having more space, giving the padding and moved more so upwards, surrounding your shins for safety compared to West Coast shin guards, directly contacting your shins. And let's just say it's not the most comfortable when a metal bar presses against your shins, although I personally did not experience any discomfort myself. In terms of riding this, I would definitely recommend riding this in the evening or night if you have the opportunity, since not only it will make a good night ride due to the ride being pitch black, feeling the thrill during the night, but also might be running its fastest. So the final drop can be specifically special. Finally, I'd like to mention that the operations was a bit longer than the other coasters at the little bit above 2 minutes when I went. Although I could completely understand with it was already night by the time when we have gotten on the coaster. Anyways, just to be safe, I'll timestamp the spoilers within the video, since a lot of the elements are hidden from public view, and the first rides would likely be better if the spoiled segments were surprises for your enjoyment. Talking about our first spoiler, you start off sitting in your train, waiting for the ride to start. Before your ride starts, your ride operator will try to do many things to start up the ride before the ride launches, when they intentionally mislead the riders with a surprise unexpected launch forwards. I honestly like how this quirk of the operations, due to the fact that the ride operators can get quite creative how they can trick the average guest on when you're going to launch, especially since with the press of a button, you actually launch up to your top speed of 70 miles per hour. With acceleration, it has all right force, although you do get that acceleration paired with the speed sensation. After that, you experience some decent positives within the entry of the loop, and what follows is towards the inversion point of the vertical loop, get sustained hang time for many seconds. Now this is being experienced with only a lap bar, specifically one that's pulled down in front of you, while not being padded too much. Therefore, from my experience, the lap bar was contacting my thighs and felt my upper body and some of my torso feeling exposed. And while this isn't the most sustained hang time experience I've done, it's definitely the most exciting instance of hang time, and probably my favorite. Also, what's also up for debate is how tall the loop really is. Now, marketing claims that the loop, along with the tallest point of the ride, is 160 feet tall. Now, in reality, the tallest point of the ride is the track above the loop, with a noticeable gap in the track between the track above and below the loop. In reality, the diameter of the loop was measured 127 feet tall, being a foot shorter than Scream's loop, and 6 feet taller than Twisted Colossus alone. Thus, the loop is therefore not the tallest loop in the park, even, let alone the US. Anyways, next comes our second and final spoiler of the ride, so you can skip to the time card here, if you want to surprise yourself, because trust me, you do. After the hang time, you get decent positives exiting the loop, weak laterals while turning towards the right. For that, you have a good demonstration of speed going through a S-bend and a dive loop, although no forces sadly. Then you get a weak positives in the pullout, and suddenly stop inside of a tunnel with LSMs. Now when you're entering this moment, there's not enough LSMs to just launch you forward with a burst of speed. So instead, there's a cool thing that the LSMs can do, and that's a reverse launch. With that, you feel the mild acceleration going backwards, which is a cool sensation. Along with this, you get sent up the dive loop, and while not getting any forces sadly, it does keep the sensation of the speed consistent, After that, you have to launch out of the tunnel and take a long forceless turn up to the line with the loop that has a head of speed. Once you crest over the loop, you suddenly start heading down, which was the final drop. And just to say, this may be my favorite element I've written, at least so far. The final drop gives a sustained ejector throughout the entire portion where you're cresting forwards. Not just that, but this ejector was being powerful, and even more so Wonder Woman in the same part. This was powerful enough that the kind of put stress on my torso during the moment. I'll say that the drop was stronger in the back, although the front was also ridiculously strong as well. The coaster didn't really break while getting ejected, since it was during the night and could have had a faster speed compared earlier towards the day. So therefore, the worries of a trimmed drop wasn't needed. Now after this moment, you do slow down into the brake run, where you sadly do not have positives during the final drop. But I think the airtime was good enough to justify a satisfying finale. Now with Full Throttle, you have many strong instances of force, such as pacing, speed, hang time, and airtime, along with the fact that there is not really any dead spots of the ride with any stoppage is either before, after, or is there for anticipation for the next surprise. So maybe think that Full Throttle is going to be in the elite category, being one of the higher ranked ones, right? Well, there's one thing that's holding the coaster back for me, and that's the layout being extremely short and incomplete. There are a total of 5 elements, and 4 of those are truly special moments. They're not really justified to be like that ranked really high. I honestly think that to improve the coaster is to have more elements after the vertical loop before reaching the Suprise 2 area, as the middle section with the supporting elements can help make the vertical loop, Suprise 2, and final drop become even more standout elements, plus making the ride a longer experience, and probably making this coaster a top 3 in the park, at least for myself. In that case, this coaster goes in between Apocalypse and Batman, being the final coaster I've ridden that day. Before I get to the final ranking, along with what I'd anticipate next time being on the list, there are a few things I'd like to mention. First off, the park varies in terms of atmosphere. At best, you have some good atmosphere and decoration between the rides in those lands, with the most notable examples being the underground. After that, you have some decent attempts at theming with the DC coasters. The average coaster here might have a nice backdrop, although it doesn't have theming whatsoever. And the worst offenders of appearance with coasters seem to have no effort in making the area look nice or appealing. Looking at you, Scream. The mountain and desert backdrop often adds character towards the park. It makes it feel like the park isn't all a concrete playground. And when there's not really anything to hide in which terms of plant work or terrain, there's thankfully a nice painted roller coaster or a building that doesn't really feel out of place from what I've remembered. Sure, the theming is quite minimal, but it's still serviceable. Additionally, the pathway towards the coasters are quite easy to find, as other than Samurai Summit and those 2 roller coasters that have their own dead end towards the back of the park, the pathways complete a complete circuit, and that the coasters are adjacent towards the pathway. If you would have gone clockwise towards DC Universe, you would have approached the coasters in the following order: New Revolution, Viper, X2, Tatsu, Apocalypse, West Coast Racers, and Gold Rusher. If you would have headed counterclockwise to DC Universe, it would be Full Throttle, Bugs Bunny World, Magic Flyer, Goliath, Twisted Colossus, and Scream. Operations at the park for a busy day wasn't too bad, as dispatches averaged 2 minutes, which wasn't really bad for a park to dispatch coasters. Along with dispatches, loose articles are pretty loose at the park, as excluding Wonder Woman X2, where those rides have mandatory lockers, the parks offer cubbies for where your items can go during the ride. Now, while with staffing comes a bit unpredictable, sometimes customer service can be quite unprepared, while other instances employees can be quite efficient with their jobs. It depends on who and when you go to that could have the quality change. Additionally, from my experiences, the park has typically two types of crowds. These crowds occur on non-holiday school breaks, having sizable lines at the park, and a park having a barely anyone go there, occurring with normal school and business days. I would more so recommend doing the former, as the park, when busier, typically has more rides open due to higher demand for employees. I would also say that the park does have their unreliable rides, such as X2, Viper, Ninja, and Superman Escape from Krypton, can have potential downtime here and there. Finally, it's recommended to do a full day from start to end using a flash pass if you want to do all the coasters in one visit, as I've gotten to half of them this time around while getting rewrites and food while using skip-a-line passes. Now out of the way, I will now do my rankings for parks coasters. Starting off in last would be Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers at number 9. It's sadly by default going to be last in the Magic Mountain ranking so far, due to the fact that it has one weird jolt of positives as an instance of force. Therefore, it ranks 36th out of 9 of my overall credits. So at least it's not the worst thing in the world. 8th place does go to Newer Revolution. This does have a good inversion, along with alright valleys in the first half for positive forces. And it's a nice long experience. It's just too tame to rank higher. And it's very sporadic in terms of like forces. It does rank 17th out of 39. Ranking at number 7 is Apocalypse the Ride. This coaster has some forceful moments, plus a really good sensation of exciting pacing, but the forced moments are too sporadic and too little. Although it does have some good instances. It does rank 15th out of 39. 6th will be going to Full Throttle. Now this coaster has some amazing moments of force, and also is quite consistent. However, it does lack in the duration and elements in order to compromise with the criteria that I've set. Therefore, this ranks 10th out of 39 out of my total rankings. 5th place goes to Batman the Ride. The coaster is very forceful in the positive G-forces when has the chance to, although the moments are sporadic and are broken up with breaks from the action. Not bad, I'll say, although I prefer to have a more consistent ride. Ranks 8th out of 37 overall. 4th place goes to the other blue B&M I've ridden that day, Scream. Now, in the first half of the coaster is very consistent in rhythm that I've rarely seen in a roller coaster up to that point. However, it dies completely off in the second half, just filling in the time with nothing, but still fun. Ranks 6th out of 39 overall. Ranking 3rd is West Coast Racers, by far the most consistent and varied coaster I've experienced in elements and forces. Although it's a family thrill coaster, so it's not really the most forceful, but still good fun. Ranks 3rd out of 39. Then follows the second with Wonder Woman Flight of Courage. The first drop has very good force, with the rest of the layout having some variety of forces throughout, although it's quite mild. Ranked 2nd out of 39. Finally, the best coaster I've ridden that day was Twisted Colossus. This ride is consistent with its strength of elements and adds some variety of how the elements are taken, such as drops, wave turns, and sustained camelbacks. Ranks 1st out of 39 overall. Now, while these coasters are a lot to have in a single park to ride, I still haven't ridden all of them. So therefore, I thought up a plan to see what my predictions will be for my rankings when I go next time.
Hey everyone, my name's Mr. Coaster Swag, and as Diesel mentioned earlier, coaster rankings are very subjective and everybody kind of has their own take on things, so he thought it would be fair if another person came in to give their secondary opinions, and so here I am. So I'm going to go ahead and talk through kind of the coasters of Six Flags Magic Mountain and how I would rank them compared to Diesel, maybe picking up on some things that he may have ignored that affected my ride experience, as well as talking about some of my personal preferences there. So starting off in the 20th spot, I would have Magic Flyer. I actually haven't ridden this one. I have 18 out of 20 credits at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is one of the ones I do not have. As Diesel said, there's a height restriction. This coaster basically does nothing, so I'd have it at dead last. Up ahead of that, I have Speedy Gonzales. So I think Diesel did a good job of ranking that one. Again, it's just a kiddie coaster. It doesn't do too much, and it's actually one of the worst kiddie coasters I've done, so not a great ride. Above that, I have Canyon Blaster, which is actually really good kiddie coaster. I did do this one, and there's some airtime hills over there. This is an ENF Miler creation, so it has a little more aggression than a typical kiddie coaster, but all in all, nothing too special. Above that, I have Roadrunner Express, which I actually haven't ridden, but I have ridden very similar Vekoma kiddie coasters, and I can tell you for a fact that these rides are really great and some of the best kiddie coasters out there. Now, actually going into the adult coaster lineup, at very bottom of that, at spot number 16, I have Gold Rusher, and the reason why Gold Rusher is so low is because it has all that aero jank. It's kind of a rough ride. It's still really fun. There's a helix at the end that's really fun, but overall not the best. And above that, I have New Revolution at spot number 15, which I think Diesel and I pretty much agree on. It's a good ride, but it only really has one forceful element. Otherwise, pretty fun ride, but nothing too special. And above that, we have Ninja, which is another kind of family coaster. Nothing too aggressive here. I put it above Revolution, and I have a feeling that Diesel would too, just because this one has a better setting. And it goes over the water, and the overall ride has just better pacing. Although the loop on New Revolution could cause some people to put that ahead of Ninja, but I think they're pretty interchangeable. And above that, I have Superman Escape from Krypton, which is a strata coaster, actually, 400 feet tall, but it never really reaches that height, and the launch is really, really abysmal. If anybody has ever ridden it, they'll tell you straight up that the launch kind of feels more like a push than an actual launch, so that's why I have it so low at number 13. And in the number 12 position, this is going to come to as a shock to many people, but I have West Coast Racers, and I have this ranked much lower than Diesel does. And if any of you know me, you know that I don't like West Coast Racers because the trains are really bad. The shin guards are very annoying, and they can affect your ride experience, especially when you're, a little bigger or taller, right? It's going to hit up against your shins. And also the comfort collars are just terrible. And Premier trains are bad because of those comfort collars. So super uncomfortable because of that. But as Diesel said, the ride itself is actually pretty good. The launches aren't the most forceful thing in the world, but the layout is pretty good. You get a good mix of forces there. You get some laterals. You get some airtime. So I'm a big fan of the actual layout, but they just need to fix those trains, and they could definitely go up a few spots. And above that, at spot number 11, I have Riddler's Revenge. Diesel has not ridden this one, and this one is a very polarizing coaster because it's a stand-up coaster. So, it is pretty, I would say it's pretty smooth for its age, and it's extremely forceful, like one of the best layouts I've ever done on a B&M. But the problem is that it's very uncomfortable, and if you position your seat incorrectly, you could actually encounter a lot of pain. So it's just an overall uncomfortable ride experience for most people. That's why I have a little lower than some of the other rides that we're going to get to. But yeah, just not a big fan. And ahead of that, I have Apocalypse at number 10. I think Diesel did a pretty good job of ranking this one. I definitely agree with him that, it could just be a much better ride. It doesn't do a ton. The biggest strength it has is that it has really out of control pacing, and so you feel like you're gonna fly off the track, which is awesome. But aside from that, the forces themselves not the greatest, and it's a little bumpy and rough, so not my favorite ride at the park. But all things considered, it is pretty fun. And at number 9, we have Goliath. Now Goliath is well regarded as a hated coaster in the coaster community. And the reason why is because it doesn't really give much airtime, which I totally agree with. But it does have good positive G's and a really good sense of speed. It's still a hyper coaster at the end of the day. So, I really do like this ride. It's one of the few rides made by G Vanola. So, it's a special one. And I do like it, but certainly would have preferred a B&M Hyper here. I definitely know that would have been better just based on my ride experiences. But yeah, Goliath at number 9, pretty solid middle tier coaster for me. And at number 8, I have a Batman the Ride, which is a B&M invert. I do think that Diesel probably put it a little bit high. I personally have Batman below Full Throttle, and I'll get to Full Throttle in a second. But I do think that Batman, it is a short, really, really intense ride. It has, I would say, great elements in whip. But it does feel like it's lacking just a little bit. It's not the most complete ride, and there are some moments that are a little bit dead, especially when it's running on a slow day. If you get it on a good day, a summer day, then maybe it can be a little bit higher. But I would say a solid number 8. Very good ride, very fun ride, but just a little short. And at spot number 7, I have Scream, which I think Diesel and I have to acknowledge that we're kind of in the minority here. We both love this ride. We like it because it has variety of forces, and it's a very forceful roller coaster, actually. And on my rides, at least, all my rides I've done on it, it's been really smooth. So I really enjoy Scream. I think it's a great ride. It's really fun. Doesn't ever really get a line, so you can just, ride that all day, and it's a great ride. So I think I totally agree with Diesel's placement of it. We place it a little higher than other people, but I just think it's a great ride with such a good variety. And now we have Full Throttle. So yeah, Diesel and I have a little bit of a disagreement here. I think Diesel puts it a little bit low. I think it is a very, very good ride, borderline elite for me. And I do think the reason for that is because the elements are so good. Again, I totally get the complaints. It is very short. It feels a little bit incomplete. But the elements themselves are just really, really awesome. They are world class and some of the best I've ever done out of any ride. I do wish the ride was just a little bit better paced and a little bit longer, but I mean, the launch, the hang time you get in the loop, the backwards launch, that stuff is all great. So I have no problem with the ride as it is. I just think it could be so much better with a little bit more length. And now looking at number 5, this is another ride that Diesel hasn't ridden, which is Viper. And Viper's great. I love Viper. It's personally one of my favorites. I know that it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's very, very intense. You got a couple loops in there. You got some wonky hang time. And it is a little bit rough. It is kind of an older aero coaster, so you're going to get some of that aero jank. But I do love that ride. And I think it is a fan favorite if you love intensity. At number 4, I have Wonder Woman Flight of Courage. I think Diesel put it perfectly. It should, out of the coasters that he rode, definitely should be second in the park. It's a great ride. The first drop gives you some pretty good airtime. The pacing is immaculate on this ride. It's still one of the best paced rides, I think. Really whippy. You really feel that sense of speed. The elements, they're pretty good. They definitely could be better. I mean, they're much better RMCs. This is probably one of the worst RMCs, but still a great ride overall, and I think it's fantastic. And at number 3, we have X2. This one, I think when Diesel rides it, he's going to love it. It's really, really intense coaster. There's only a couple elements, but they're all very, very good. I do rank X2 a little bit lower than most people do because I don't think that it's the perfect ride. It is very flawed in my opinion. It can come off as rough to some people. Personally, didn't have too many issues with this outside of the final Raven turn. But I think the bigger issue is just that it doesn't do much outside of intensity. It's just intensity. That's the entire ride, and it feels like it's going to rip you apart, but it doesn't do much beyond that, and so that's why I have it at number 3. But at the number 2 spot, and this is a controversial ranking, but I have Tatsu at number 2. I think this is an interesting coaster because not everybody likes it. It is not the most forceful ride in the world, aside from the pretzel loop. The rest of the ride is actually very mild, but the reason why I love it so much is because you fly over the scenery and over the paths, and you just get such a great view of Magic Mountain, and that's why I love it so much. Personally, just have a lot of nostalgia for this coaster, but I recognize that it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's why I have it at number 2 and not number 1. Number 1 actually is Diesel and I agree on this one 100%, which is Twisted Colossus. And I think, it's really hard to make an argument that this is not the number one in the park. Besides X2, I think those are the only two coasters where you can really say, okay, that is, mind-blowingly elite. Twisted Colossus has that dueling factor, and that's amazing. You don't always duel, but, even if you don't duel, that the RMC layout is just perfect. I mean, I've been on a couple of them now, and Twisted Colossus is still very, very good. You get so much air time, you get a good mix of hang time, some whip here and there. It's just a really strong overall coaster. It's very smooth, really fun, and you get to go around the course twice, so it ends up being a really long ride, and Twisted Colossus is definitely one of my favorites. So, yeah, I think Diesel and I overall, I think he has a really good list. We do have a few minor disagreements here and there, particularly with Full Throttle and probably Apocalypse and West Coast Racers. But aside from those nitpicks, I think he has a really good list, and definitely think that we kind of see eye to eye on a lot of this stuff. So yeah, that's my take, and thanks for having me, Diesel.
Oh yeah, and there's actually a couple of other things I would like to cover. First of all, these rankings will actually more so be prediction-wise. So if you're wondering why these are ranked but not these, it's going to be more so predicting where these roller coasters are going to go, which probably would be pretty comparable if we stack it up between another roller coaster. For example, this theoretical spot for X2, you see, an example of how this will be ranked is going left to right is actually how it's going to go. You have the better roller coasters are actually on the left, whereas the roller coasters inferior going to be on the right. So, for example, Twisted Colossus is theoretically better than X2. Oh yeah, and additionally, this is going to be more so adjacent to what is most comparable of a roller coaster. Being right next to each other. So for example, is if it could be Twisted Colossus is probably much more closer in the rankings compared to Wonder Woman in terms of this theoretical scenario of if X2 gets up here. And yeah, there's also a couple of other things I'll have to mention. The first thing I would probably, the next thing I'll say is there's 10 roller coasters in this category. So if you don't know, I actually have ridden Gold Rusher before, in which the roller coasters actually did not get put into the review, given I did not ride it at that time. So since the review would have been getting a bit broken up, or would be a bit inconsistent towards what the main intention of the review was, being sharing my 2024 experience, it did get cut from the review. So I'll just do a little synopsis for this one. Alright, so if you don't know, Gold Rusher is actually an aerodynamics mine train, which is actually the second oldest roller coaster operating at the park still. The other one being a one that we will mention shortly after this. So if you don't know, a Gold Rusher is actually quite of a tame mine train. It has it is a quite long of experience, but the forces there are actually quite sporadic. You do have some interesting lateral portions of the experience, along with the fact that you have some weird airtime pops, and you have that final helix where it has sustained laterals. but mostly the second section, like the first, like after the first lift hill, it's all right in terms of like pacing. But what happens in the second portion is what is kind of like probably bringing down this ride. Given there's not too many instances of like force. In fact, not even really a speed sensation, which I could say that New Revolution has a better speed sensation. It's like even it doesn't have like too many forces, it at least has the speed sensation. Like at least you're going a bit quick in the layout. But yeah, Gold Rush is actually it's actually quite of an interesting like family demographic of being more so like lower end of like family. You know, a step up from the kids coasters, which is a nice addition for the park, but we have to put it in like this place. All right, now that like lengthy discussion is over, I'd say like we actually will start with the like rankings. Yay! And I tried this a few times, but I had not too much like thought process there. So thankfully, I actually did get some notes for the I think like 8 of the roller coasters that are being talked about in this section. The 2 exceptions are Magic Flyer and Canyon Blaster. Alright, in terms of like you know like there's actually like a second category. There's actually another category. It's actually called We'll Never Ride. Now you may be asking, Diesel, why is there a category like this? Well, you see, there is one certain roller coaster that you have to be under 54 inches, and sadly, we have to give it to the park's oldest coaster, Magic Flyer, the only Bradley and Kay roller coaster left in existence, which is actually documented in RCB as a relocation from Beverly Park, probably built in the 40s. So actually quite interesting like history there, but however, we can never ride this, so who knows how the ride experience is. It could be like boring as hell, or it could be the most extreme and exciting thing we've ever seen. Who knows? But for one thing, sure, we're never getting this roller coaster unless you were like, I don't know, younger than 7. Alright, anyways, with this out of the way, I'd say let's start with our real first choice, Canyon Blaster. This E&F Miler kiddie coaster is actually a quite small of an addition. Actually some short, but I've heard it actually has some punchy elements. There's actually 4 elements in total, which is the first drop, the big camelback, the wonky helix, and then the airtime hills at the end. In terms of like the roller coaster, from what I've seen from like video, because these are predictions after all, I can't really like say anything from experience. I would say the helix could probably have like some like alright laterals along with the airtime hills at the end, having like either floater or ejector airtime. Whatever it could be. In terms of like this ride, it actually does have like a good various amount of moments. It's quite solid in that category. It looks to have like good consistency. It's like a lot of kiddie coasters look to be like quite slow. This is actually at least a little bit, has a little bit of a bite, I've heard, or have seen from the video I've seen of it. And then, yeah, so this is definitely better than Speedy Gonzales by default, given it has like at least the forces portion of it, which is actually quite nice. However, might be like one thing that I could see detracting it, and that's definitely the length. I'm not kidding when I say there's actually less than 5,000 feet of track, which is which is actually like which is actually less track than the length than the height of Falcon's flight. You know you're saying something when the roller coaster is actually is much more shorter than a ride that's literally supposed to be the tallest roller coaster in the world. And since it's actually a bit quick, I would say it probably has a lack of quantity in the ride and layout. So even though I guess this is totally appropriate for a kids coaster, although even though a longer experience would much be nicer luxury, it's at least good that you have a little good taste of your first roller coaster. But unfortunately, I will have to say it's actually quite a short in terms of comparing to other roller coasters. And it's not really like fluid like Tidal Twister, where at least in my opinion, as those like small elements at least can be like repeated over and over, given you're at a constant speed and consistent like pace and speed. Plus Tidal Twister just is an 8-figure, so don't really have to worry about too much. But there's another question I would like to say is this better? Is Canyon Blaster better than Gold Rusher? Which do I prefer? Do I prefer a ride that has like that's a more consistent with the forces, or it's a longer? However, the ride is like, you know, quite sporadic. Now I could see like actually like Canyon Blaster being a bit more memorable. And actually I have an additional rule. Apart from the standard criteria of mine being like you have to have variety, consistency, duration, and strength. Rides that don't have all of this, I would probably prefer like a shorter ride with like more consistency compared to a longer ride with sporadic forces. So I would probably say I'll put this over this. I know, quite sad. Alright, next is actually Goliath. This time I've actually watched a video of it. So yeah, if you don't know, Goliath is actually the second tallest roller coaster in California. In fact, the second tallest roller coaster like that's on like the West Coast. I believe the next one up for like full circuit like tallest and fastest is actually that's like is probably like Titan at Six Flags Over Texas. And from like the looks of it for like Goliath, I will say that from video and from people like talking about it, I could see like the ride falling apart, falling into victim of being a bit tame on the forces. But more so like there's not too many instances. Probably has less than Canyon Blaster, as you just have like a helix and then perhaps a floater hill if you're lucky. I will say I've heard it actually is quite good at speed in the first half, although it kind of dies off in the second half. So it's actually quite inconsistent in terms of like, is there going to be forces? Is there any parts of forces? No, definitely not. I've heard, although I have heard it actually has like good moments of like positive forces. Like sustained ones in the helix. But you're going through 4,000 feet of track. Remember this. 4,500 feet of track to be precise. And you know, if you don't have like too many moments of force, then I guess then will I rank it that high? Not really. In terms of like layout creativity, there could be like some moments of like, I could see like the first half being this like speed monster, whereas the second half is more like a twister type of thing. However, I could see like not too many moments of force, not too many like, you know, like varied elements towards this, and it's also, it looks to be a bit short, even though like in terms of like how many like elements there are in total, like, yeah, and this is like 4,000 feet of track, especially after like the freaking mid course, the one that everyone criticizes. So yeah, went on a bit of a tangent there. Although now here rises the question: would I rank this over this? Well, first of all, I would say New Revolution. There could be like similar, like in terms of like duration. However, I'll probably point that New Revolution might have like a more creative layout. I mean, there are like 3 main sections, I believe. The first section I would say has like the camelbacks that like you're like more so like going high off the ground in quotation marks, which actually builds anticipation for the vertical loop. And then afterwards you have the low to the ground section that's also like quite hidden from the public eye. So it's more, which it has more so turns compared to New Revolution's first section having like these like twisting camelbacks, but not really but it's also like more so vertical. And also the loop is at least in the second portion. So there's like this anticipation, I believe. Whereas Goliath, I would maybe the lift hill could be a bit of anticipation. Yeah. So in terms of like how like Goliath is and other stuff, I might prefer like New Revolution, although it depends on like how I'd actually like the helix portion. And also the part of the anticipation portion. The same park has actually quite a much better like anticipation for a 200-foot tall roller coaster, being X2, which we'll discuss short, like in, I wouldn't say like a couple like in an hour or so, because I don't want that to last that long. Anyways, next we have Ninja. Now, Ninja is actually a family suspended coaster by Aerodynamics, once again, in which it actually looks to be quite of a good family coaster. Unfortunately, it was like closed during like my 2 visits to the park, so I didn't get to ride it. But still, so in terms of like Ninja, it has like the suspended cars, and which has like the swinging sensations, and which actually looks to add like a little bit of like an interesting, unique gimmick or factor. I wouldn't say gimmick, but more so like a trait, where a lot of like lateral movement could be replaced from, instead of like feeling like laterally from your body, it more so like is the swinging car sensation, which actually looks quite interesting. In terms of like layout, I would say it looks to have like a couple of dead spots, more so in the beginning section. But but the rest of it looks fine. For in terms of like how consistent your ride forces are. Now the duration for this ride, I thought it would be a bit longer, but the ride is actually kind of like decently long. Like still solid length. It would probably not feel short, given there's like a few a decent quantity of like elements. And also the fact that in terms of like forces as well, you also have like a couple moments of positives, which could be either like decently forceful or actually quite good forces. Sure, not like to the extreme, or not like really too forceful. Like West Coast Racers can be a bit forceful onto helixes. Another family a family thrill attraction there, but still not too bad. I could see like in terms of like flaws, which are kind of minor, like when comparing to the rest of the ride, is it couldn't be a bit weak on the forces, along with the fact that you have like a couple of dead spots in the beginning, as well as like not really like it's more so like the forces portion of like sequencing of the layout, instead of a more so like well thought out like sequencing, where like woves into each element like seamlessly, like kind of like why like rides like Scream or West Coast Racers, because they're quite seamless in like the transitions and actually feel like that rhythm and stuff. I would say it'll still be good. Now a question arises. Would I like put this above Apocalypse? It's actually honestly, I'll probably say I'm leaning towards yes. Given Apocalypse does actually have like a consistency, like in terms of like pacing, like the roughness for that one actually definitely makes the experience for me. However, there's like very few moments of like forces, so with like it just has like a few ejector moments, a couple ones, and then like a little lateral sensation, one little laterals on the turns for at least back row rides. Whereas Ninja is more so consistent, however, it's less strong. And like with like my tastes, I more so like use like forces, like strength of forces, as like as more so like precision in like determining like. I rarely rank rides based off like on their forces like highly. Hence why I like Full Throttle's is lower than how I like the elements. So yeah. Alright, next is Riddler's Revenge, which is a B&M stand-up. In fact, the longest in the a B&M looper in the world. The only roller coasters that are made by B&M that's longer are probably their Hyper model. Alright, so from like POV, it's actually like has like a lot of like stuff happening. In the first half, you have like a lot of the more tolerant versions, and then at the second half, you have like the like more so like smaller versions and like smaller twists and bends, which actually is a very comparable ride to like another ride I've done, Scream. Although there is like some notable differences when like looking towards like more specifically. For one, this ride actually has 6 inversions, while Scream has 7, and then along with having stand-up trains. So, what do I think would happen? I could see like a lot of like the tolerant versions having like strong positives, and along with the fact that it's actually like very consistent in the first half. Something I actually liked about Scream, I would say. And then also I could see some moments of like laterals, like on some like the lower turns, along with the fact that you have some moments of almost like more so like the corkscrews. Sad that this didn't get a 0G roll, which actually would be quite interesting on a stand-up roller coaster. At least B&M wise, like I know that Shockwave at Drayton Manor used to have a 0G roll, but also the fact that you have like the ride has like it has actually like a good amount of variety in the layout. Although there is one thing that I would there's also wait, hold on. I believe like the forces could be like quite sustained in like a Scream. Alright, now this is where I have the determining spot. This actual Riddler Revenge is actually has like one thing that's definitely like much more like superior to like Scream. Yeah, abrupt transition, I know. And that's actually Riddler's Revenge is that actually has like much of a better consistency I could see. Because my main complaint with like Scream more so of the like is more so like the second half, where it has like void of any forces. There could be a couple moments, but not really. But not really like impactful. Like Riddler's Revenge, on the other hand, is actually, well, you see, it's actually quite. You know, Riddler's Revenge actually has like a couple of dead spots, like here and there. I could see like some like the turnarounds being like taking a bit long, but from like but it's actually like more so like spread out, first of all, than Scream, and second of all, like the sporadic moments, and second of all, I could see the fact that it has like standing trains, so it could be a bit forgiving on like the legs, depending on like how the stand-up trains like actually bother me. Given I've never done a stand-up coaster before. And yeah. Honestly, I would say probably like Riddler is probably better. And you know, it has like a lot of the stuff that I actually like on roller coasters, such as variety, consistency, duration is quite long. It actually has like probably strength. However, there could be like one thing that could be there's actually like there's one thing that probably is definitely like leaving it a bit low. Given I'm not low, I mean like lower than West Coast Racers. Given that West Coast Racers is more so as an instance of like airtime, which honestly I would say that in terms of like roller coasters, like comparably, it's like you probably like want to have like a lot of stuff included in these roller coasters. In terms of like again a higher ranking for my tastes, or probably have like some sort of like interesting stuff. Which while yes it does have like Riddler Revenge, it could be a lot of kind of like Scream where it has like a rhythm, like probably the best part of that ride. And then also the fact that like West Coast has like the racing feature and other stuff. And there are like a few other rides that have like additional elements to like how the ride sequencing is that could be better. So yeah. Alright, next up we have Roadrunner Express, which is a Vekoma Junior roller coaster. Alright, so Roadrunner I could see having potential laterals on the turns. It's not much, but it's actually it's actually more so a larger scale of a kids coaster. Now I would say there could be some potential moments of like laterals and a couple of positive G-forces based on like a similar ride I've ridden, like Patriot at Castles and Coasters. Oh yeah, next week next videos on that. But yeah, if you don't know, Roadrunner is actually could probably be like pretty tame on the forces. And I could see like having some lateral moments, but mostly not doing too much. Although quite short. So in terms of like ride experience, I would definitely put it above like Speedy Gonzales. Although definitely like Gold Rusher probably has like the upper edge with like laterals and some airtime moments. Next we have the simple one, the one and only. Actually, totally not 415 foot tall roller coaster, but actually is 328 feet roller coaster, and the first roller coaster to go over 100 miles per hour and use LSM technology. It's Superman Escape from Krypton. Now this is actually the one-trick pony of the park. It's like if you think of any roller coaster at the park that has like one trick, it's definitely Superman. It's like more so than Goliath. In terms of like the ride experience, all of this is just a lengthy launch, along with the fact that you have like weightless spikes. Now you may be saying, now it's like, which while yes it is quite sustained and quite consistent with the layout, it only has like 2 elements, which is less than Goliath, much less than Goliath. But yeah, it's probably the shortest adult roller coaster in the park. It's like this and this are like this and this are probably like shorter, but that's not saying much, really. I would say I would probably prefer Goliath over this. Probably the worst adult coaster in the park. Like, the park doesn't have any bad roller coasters. Probably at best has mediocre ones. But yeah, what more can I say about this? I mean, I could see the launch being like a pretty good launch. Sure, like in my definition, I mean, sure, it's not. I don't think it might not be punchy, but the sustained factor could probably make it up for me. I mean, I kind of liked Incredicoaster's Coaster's like launch, and that one was kind of like weak, although actually was quite long. This might be a better launch, but yeah. However, it's gonna have to stick with this one. So yeah. Next, we have the flying dinosaur of the park. The B&M Tatsu Chinese Dragon. Or whatever the theme is, I don't know. This is actually one of the last like mainly expensive like editions of the park. No wait, of the chain. This was actually one of the 3 Six Flags 2006 editions. Like right when, you know, the same time where the company had to like go in panic mode with the financial stuff. But yeah. So from POV of Tatsu, it's actually like, this ride actually looks very consistent, I would say. There could be no true dead space in the ride, which I've only said about 2 roller coasters. This, and then, no, I've only said it about 3 roller coasters. And that's actually, like, Tatsu, West Coast, and Twisted Colossus, which, I mean, if you're excluding, like, the brake sections, but yeah. Tatsu actually looks to be pretty graceful, and it could have, like, some good positives in, like floatiness moments or laterals, like throughout the first portion, and then the pretzel loop is like which all builds up to the, like, after being like super high off the ground, into the massive pretzel loop that could be the biggest one out of all of them, which is sustained G madness, I've heard. In which you just like, that is like the only moment I've heard that you like come close down to the bottom of the ride. Yeah, additionally, this ride looks to be quite long with the since you have like, wait, let me look it up for a little bit, but I believe it's actually like a good amount of track. Yeah, Tatsu has about 3,600 feet of track, which is a pretty long track length, especially for a B&M looper. And also including the flying position, which is a quite unique like sensation, especially like living in the West Coast, and you really don't have to, like, it's a quite void of like flying coasters here. I would say it's actually pretty good. I would definitely probably prefer it over Riddlers. Now the question is would I prefer it over West Coast Racers? That's kind of a difficult one, given, yes, you have these airtime moments on West Coast Racers, along with the fact that you have the positives on the Helix, along with the floating versions of the launches and other stuff. However, West Coast isn't really like too strong. It's actually quite, there's like, sure, there's no dead space, but it's also quite long. But it's actually kind of like difficult depending on like what I think. What is there? The one thing that might bring it down is it's not that forceful, and like too like crazy intense. You definitely have forceful moments, that's for sure. But it's actually not really like the most tense thing. And these two roller coasters definitely have the variety, the consistency, and the length. However, there is one thing that might edge out Tatsu, that being the pretzel loop intensity, which is the precise factor of how I determine rides. So yeah, I do believe that Tatsu might be better than West Coast Racers, although it is very tight against each other. Next up we have is Viper, which is actually the Aero Mega Looper. The first roller coaster at the park to actually have more than one inversion, I believe. If I'm actually being accurate in this case. Alright, yeah, I believe that in terms of Viper, this is actually the first roller coaster in the park history to exceed one inversion, so that's quite cool. In terms of the roller coaster, it is actually close to 200 feet. In fact, if I look at RCDB right now, Viper is actually 188 feet. Just 12 feet short of 200 feet. Technically, they could have had the tallest roller coaster in the West Coast. At least the first roller coaster over 200 feet. Or it could have had a height record, which is actually quite impressive for the time. Oh yeah. Also, what's also kind of record breaking is actually has 7 inversions. I mean, not really record breaking as of now, but still quite impressive. Viper is actually, from POV, I actually do see a lot of force types in this. It's could have strong laterals at the first drop, along with some strong positive forces during the vertical inversions, with some weaker ones maybe in the corkscrew moments, or even the laterals and the corkscrew inversions also being there. I could also see a floater pop happening in the front row, along with the fact that you have the hang time. I've heard there's hang time on the final 4 inversions, being the Batwing, and the double corkscrews. In terms of ride experience, I will say that there could be 2 major dead spots, being the turn out of the mid course and then the final stretch of track leading you back to the station, because Viper actually could have, because Viper has it's actually kind of, it has speed in the first portion before the mid course brake run. Also, the fact that it has the unique loops, and along with the fact that you have a turn actually quite similar to Desert Storm, which actually could be a valid argument where it is a bigger version of Desert Storm with more inversions and other stuff. I mean, the first half kind of mimics no, actually, Desert Storm kind of mimics Viper, with the first drop, the first vertical loop, the turnaround into the second vertical loop, and then some other, and yeah, that's where the similarities kind of end between both rides. So in terms of Viper, I could see the ride also having being quite interesting, having 3 vertical loops. The first drop being quite interesting and different. along with the fact that the ride could have let's see. Yeah, I could actually see like some force types. Oh no, not again. Yeah, so probably the con of this ride might be how many like is like the dead spots like being quite long. And then but so this definitely goes above Scream in terms of my opinion. No, the question is Viper like going to be better than Riddler's Revenge? So actually, it's actually quite similar. It's either like what do I prefer? Do I prefer varied forces, or do I prefer like consistency? Honestly, even though there's like some moments of like straight track, I will actually probably prefer like this to like Riddler's. So, given that like Viper could actually be, given that Riddler is yes, it is actually more consistent compared to like Viper, but also the fact that Viper has like more force types. I mean, I could see Riddler having some float air time on the hill, along with the fact that there could be laterals and like the positives and other stuff is good. But Viper has like some hang time, some like different types of laterals, probably like some quick pops and not quick jolts, along with the fact that you have sorry, more sustained, or it could have like stronger laterals. It could also be like a bit more. I could see like a Viper having as well hang time, especially on those inversions, and the airtime pop I've heard actually is better, and not better, could actually be more possible. So where that leaves this, and there's one other roller coaster left, the legendary X2. This is actually a very interesting creation. It's the only type of the controlled like spinning fourth dimension coaster in the world. And not the world, I meant like the US or even Europe. Basically, unless you're going to Fuji-Q Highland or the China like dinosaur park, and this is your only option to ride a fourth dimension like this, a coaster like this. And in terms of like the ride, it actually is. This ride actually has the forces, I've heard. In fact, it may be the most forceful ride in the park. The only thing that compares to it is actually Tatsu's pretzel loop, but that's only one part of the ride. A lot of the ride, from at least the beginning and then the end elements, are actually like very forceful, I've heard. Especially that first drop being like looking outstanding. This is usually claimed as the best first drop in the entire state, let alone the park, and could be the best drop in the world, for I know. Along with the fact that the flipping seats actually adds a good sensation, especially that, which actually has like, I could see like the drop and then making intensity for the drop and then the positives afterwards. Those will actually sound like very good elements, along with the final Raven turn, which, well, yes, I've heard roughness. I could tolerate the roughness, along the fact that that's like more so rotating downwards. That the positive sustained positives. So it's definitely forceful. That's for sure. However, there could be. I will say that. Well, there's also like some like inversions based off of like the flipping seats, like supporting like moments. Yeah. There is actually one dead spot, that main dead spot where it's actually, I've heard the turnaround more so. And then I've heard that the fly to lie element along with the camelback looks to actually be like a bit more graceful, which cool. However, it's not really like too consistent with the ride. And kind of like what might be bringing it down is like the short length with the a bit inconsistent. Yes, there is like 3 elements on the ride that literally tries to like destroy you, I've heard. But apart from that, there's like 3 elements that are like either like tame or not really forceful. It'll still be like cool to experience them, but yeah. And a ride actually only has like 6 or 7 elements, so when it's like most of your like the majority of your ride isn't like too forceful, along the fact that X2 that 2 of those like 3 are like graceful moments, whereas one of them is a dead spot, kind of like bringing it down. Oh yeah, one more thing I'd like to mention about like X2 is this actually ride, if it has the soundtrack, this literally has some of the best anticipation to have the positive note. It's like if there's the music, you're literally looking at the park while going backwards up the lift hill, and you actually have this like great this great like combo of music, which, depending if it works, actually like gives like some good anticipation, especially since you don't know what's coming. So yeah, where would I rate this? Well, actually, the forces definitely carry the ride, I would say. In terms of this ride, I would definitely rank this like above Scream, and then. But then the thing is what I prefer this over Riddler. That unique sensation. Could definitely see it. This just has forces like more so consistently, where this one actually has some of the best moments I've heard in the world. I'll probably stop at Viper, given that this ride is given that X2's actually, that Viper has like more forceful portion, not for more force, like more forces, force types, and more so consistency. Actually, I'll probably like leave it like here, yeah. It's depending on this one, like if these two are gonna like flip each other, flip around. But yeah, there is one other roller coaster I like to talk about on this thing. That's actually Wonderland Flight of Courage. Now, this actually did get inaccurate results, given given after my rides of Twisted Colossus, I found this drop to be much better. However, I've heard it looks. I kind of felt like it had like weaker forces and other stuff. If I like get another ride on this, I would probably say I would not put this at number 2, given I actually rank Full Throttle at number like 6 currently, and it's more forceful, but it's actually shorter. But then again, this is a longer layout. It's kind of more so tame. Not like more so like graceful. Like apart from the first drop. So in terms of like this section, I might have to put this right not here, not I might put this like above screen. There, I'll put it next to X2, but X2 probably would be better. Oh, kind of like a lot of could be. I do remember having a bit of dead space. Actually, I might put this here because there's actually a bit more consistency and it's a bit longer. So yeah, this is all of the roller coasters I have ranked like for the park. So what do you? What do you think? You guys can like discuss it like in like the comments, yeah, or the Discord. But yeah, I believe this could be a bit quite accurate.
To end off this 2-hour plus video, I'd like to say that despite the flaws that the park can hold, like reliability, operations, and staffing, I found that my time was quite enjoyable, especially since all the coasters from the park I've been on did have some good traits built within. Some worth riding again for the amusement factor, along with the fact that I've gotten a lot done within a day and still have a large amount of rides left. Is a quite cool experience. Additionally, the park thankfully cleared up a lot of my intimidation factors of coasters, such as heights, vertical inversions, vibration, and steeper drops. From the start of the day, I thought I would feel intimidated with a lot of the coasters given my lack of experience. And while I was a bit scared of Tatsu and X2 during the time, given the forces I've heard it produces, I will say that it definitely cleared up some concerns with riding. And now I have a few other locations that I already went to, and some planned. So, how about I tell you what I've done? Or I could show you instead.